and welcome to the Days of Yore. Surprise, I'm back. I guess I was a little premature in my signing off last week. So after a very successful eco-spirit journey, Ken Walker has taken some extra time. And so for the rest of this calendar year, for the next 6 weeks, including this week, we will be taking our continued look at the history of Nelson and of Beaubears Island here on the Days of Yore. So, and I guess probably in the interest of full disclosure, I will say that at the end of that time, I also will be taking some time away, and so we'll wrap up what will have been, 30 some odd episodes of the Days of Yore. So, like I say, I need some time to rest and refresh and find some new stories, and perhaps I will be back again. But like I say, we've got the next 5 weeks after this together, so not quite time to say goodbye yet. So today we'll be looking at Brown's Woolen Mill, and in some respects this episode may be regarded as a follow-up or a continuation of our episode from several weeks ago on Flett's carding mill. And I will leave a link to that video in the description below if you'd like to refer back to it. So my sources today come from the newspapers. There's in 1964 when Brown's Woolen Mill closed, and also from W.D. Hamilton's Dictionary of Miramichi Biography. So let's begin. And I'm also fully aware how comically small my bow tie is. So there you go, just so you're aware. So as we talked about several weeks ago, Harry Brown began working at Flett's carding mill with his grandfather, Thomas Ambrose, at the age of 12 in 1904. And 4 years later, at the age of 16 and following the death of his grandfather, he took over operations. So again, at the age of 16 years old, he is now in charge of Flett's carding mill. And as you might remember from our previous episode, Flett's carding mill did very well, but of course it did not spin the wool into yarn. And so as the 19th century turned into the 20th century, and as the 20th century rolled on, fewer and fewer people had retained that skill of spinning the carded wool into yarn. And so that meant that the business at Flett's carding mill began to drop off. Even though Harry Brown leased the mill from the Flett family in 1929 and began to run it in his own right, the Fletts, of course, had been a little bit more focused on their lumbering operations, and the carding mill had become something of a sideline. So he leased it from them in 1929, and in 1931 he bought it and decided to sell off the machinery and start a new operation all his own. And he started it on the Brown property in South Nelson, and started and opened a new mill in 1933. This mill not only he carded wool, it also spun it into yarn, which again allowed him a great deal more flexibility in his operations, and meant that he was quite a bit more attractive to those folks who wanted their wool spun and after it had been carded. So up until 1938, the entire mill ran on a gas generator. This was because electricity did not make it to South Nelson, was not extended to that area until that time. So again, I mean, we often take for granted electrification in our own day and age, but Harry Brown, didn't have that luxury. and again had to employ the use of a gas engine to operate all the machinery at his woolen mill for the first 5 years of its operation. These new machines that he had brought in were from Amherst, Nova Scotia, and they were quite large, which meant that the woolen mill had to be quite a big operation with quite large buildings. As an example, the carding machine itself was 40 feet long. The spinning mule, which spun the carded wool into yarn, was 62 feet long and weighed over 4 tons. So again, I mean, these are massive, massive machines. And again, so we're not talking about a very small operation. We've seen, and you're seeing right now, some of the images of the old Flett's carding mill. It's not a huge building. But again, the operation at Brown's was quite a bit larger. And this is really evidenced by the amount of output that the mill was capable of. So wool, when it arrived at the mill, would go through a process. Now, wool was collected throughout New Brunswick and into Quebec and to a lesser extent Ontario. So Brown's wool truck would travel and collect wool from farmers all over the place. There was not a lot of sheep farming here in the Miramichi region, and there was not a sufficient amount of sheep farming in New Brunswick in order to meet the capacity of the mill. Now, Harry Brown blamed this entire affair on dogs, and that dogs that were really sort of set at liberty and just could roam at their leisure had a very nasty habit of killing sheep. Of course, dogs natural, in kind of in a wild state, in a non-domesticated state, of course, would hunt for food, and of course, a big, fat, very slow-moving sheep is much easier and much less labor-intensive. So dogs set at liberty very often wouldn't necessarily kill sheep, although they could, but they would often maul sheep and injure them to the point where they had to be euthanized, or their wool was no longer usable. So again, I don't believe that Harry Brown necessarily blamed the dogs themselves. Perhaps he blamed the owners. That being said, he did call for some pretty sharp remedies. He's against the dogs, so maybe he blamed the dogs too. But this is how he accounted for the lack of sheep farms in the area, and why he had to send his truck all the way into Quebec, and as I say, into Ontario a little, in order to collect more wool to meet the demands of the mill. So when that wool arrived, when the wool truck got back and emptied its cargo, the wool would go through the picker, which would remove any debris from the wool and get it ready to go into the 3-set carder. So as we talked about several weeks ago, the wool was then carded, was fulled, and was able then to move on to the spinner, which spun the wool, the spooler, and the twister. So the twister then would create yarn that was either 2-ply, 3-ply, or 4-ply. So 3 strands, 2 strands, and 3 strands or 4 strands, and twisted together in order to make the yarn. And then the wool would pass to a skeiner, and would produce a skein or a skein of yarn, and that weighed about a 1/4 pound. So it's interesting at this time to say that on average there was about 200 pounds a day. So that's about 1,000 skeins at a 1/4 pound a skein being produced every day. Now that output was brought up substantially during the course of the Second World War, pardon me. During the course of the Second World War, her output increased to 350 pounds a day. And Brown's wool was used in the knitting of socks, mittens, scarves, helmet covers, sweaters, any number of things for Canadian troops overseas. So interesting, like I say, I mean, you don't often think of a woolen mill contributing to military efforts in the Second World War, but there you have it. These men, of course, are fighting in less than ideal circumstances, as I'm sure you know, and certainly, I'm sure, would have appreciated the warmth that was provided by Brown's wool, having been fashioned into these things, and it allowed people here in the community to feel like they were a part of that. They could take that wool and turn it into something that was useful for their fellow Nelsoners and fellow community members across New Brunswick who were serving overseas. So at any time there was anywhere between about 10 and 20 employees, which was really important to the South Nelson economy. The South Nelson Road area benefited a great deal from Brown's Woolen Mill in terms of employment, and brought a lot of money back into the community in that way. The yarn was sold under normal circumstances, was sold at a number of outlets throughout the region. And one of those workers was, of course, Edith Brown, Harry Brown's wife, who was the bookkeeper and the overall supervisor on site. You might remember Edith Brown from one of our, I guess, late winter, maybe early spring episodes. It's on the draw for a Chevrolet touring car through the gathering of subscriptions. I believe she was the second place winner in that particular contest in 1916, if I'm not mistaken. So by 1953, even though Harry Brown was entering his senior years, he undertook a major expansion at the woolen mill and brought in a good deal of new machinery. Longtime customers ranged as far away as BC in that time. And he became, in the economic community, a source of encouragement, advice, and became kind of an elder statesman in the community generally. He served most notably on the board of the school board for the Nelson Consolidated School District, and was known to be very level-headed and very accepting of some of the decisions that were made there. Most notably, the decision to bring in teaching sisters, members of religious orders, Catholic religious orders, even though he himself was not a member of that particular denominational religious faith. He was very accepting of it being part of the school community here, and that those ladies coming in to teach in the community. By 1963, however, Harry Brown was now in his 70s, and was decided that he really kind of wanted to get out of the mill business. And unfortunately, he shut the mill down, and unfortunately could not find anyone who was willing to take it over and continue operations here in the Miramichi. And unfortunately, that meant that the mill was shut down. It became, I think, the old mill fish and chip stand, I think, for a number of years. And now the home of, I believe the site is now the place of a private dwelling. This brought to an end, quite sadly in many ways, an industrial or an economic legacy that stretched back to a $50 grant given to the Flett brothers in 1850. So that's quite something, I think, when we look back on it. I think today it's great to see so many new businesses and new entrepreneurs making their way in the Miramichi, of course, but it's always nice as well to see businesses in our community that have served its members for generations. Even though different faces are there at the forefront and on the staff, it's always very consoling to see operations like that have been there for many years as well. So so I think we'll leave it there. Brown's Woolen Mill, continuing from the Flett legacy, and again, kind of a bit of a touchstone here in the Nelson community, and Harry Brown certainly a leading citizen in those years. So if you're enjoying this content, again, I encourage you to like the video, leave a comment if you have any requests for future episodes. I guess also, I haven't been mentioning this, but be sure to ring the notification bell. That way, you know, you're made aware of every time we post a new video here on BITV. If you're interested in learning more and maybe seeing some exclusive content that has been filmed over the last 6 months and more, have a look at the Patreon options in the description below. Again, exclusive content now available to all subscribers on a time-staggered basis. I will be back once again next week. We'll be down to the final 5 episodes here on the Days of Yore. But for now, I want to bid you a fond farewell. And again, I've really enjoyed the time that we spent together. Thank you so much. And for the Days of Yore, I've been Dr. Sean McCarthy. Thanks so much.